I really wanted this book to be good. I really did, but instead it read like a glorified high school English essay or a Mr. Beast video where the author didn't trust me as the reader enough to continue reading, so he changed topics every few pages, so much so that he didn't convince me of anything and I came away feeling utterly dissatisfied. I really wanted it to be good, but it just wasn't. So to understand my frustration towards this book, you've got to understand why I was so excited for it in the first place. So I'm basically the target audience for this book. I'm someone who came from a place of believing that discipline was the only way to achieve things that you wanted in life, and had it fail me. I would always have short bursts of inspiration and of motivation where I'd work over a series of months, completely forgo feeling good in any way, shape or form. And I had that fail me multiple times. I burned out, I felt disillusioned, and every time, even when I achieved those goals, I would fall back into some sort of despair where I was wondering what it was all about and why I was even doing this anyway if I felt like shit all the time. So when I came back from travel this year, I reevaluated and did a lot of thinking about how I want to approach the things that I want to do in future. And I basically came to the idea of feel-good productivity, that I need to make sure that what I'm doing here and now is fulfilling in and of itself, and I'm living a life that I want to live, so that I stick with something for long enough for it to compound and for me to see the returns of being incredible at this thing. I arrived at that on my own. So understandably, when I saw that Ali Abdaal had written a book, and it was on feel-good productivity, I was pretty stoked. I was like, this could be really good. I don't know if is anyone else like this? I'll happily spend money on like coffees and food and random shit, but then when it comes to spending $20 on something that could potentially change my life, I procrastinate. But yeah, so I was still on the fence about it. But then I listened to a podcast on Mark Manson's podcast, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And he got Ali Abdaal on, and he was obviously promoting his new book, and I was sitting there. It was about an hour, and it was a really interesting chat. And by the end of that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to buy this book. It's probably going to be perfect. I'm probably going to love it. It came in the mail from Amazon, and it was endorsed by my entire echo chamber. Stephen Bartlett, his podcast I listen to heaps. We've got Mark Manson on the back as well. We've got Cal Newport. For fuck's sake, this book is incredible. I was the perfect target audience. Not only was I someone who had discipline fail me, but I already believed in feel-good productivity. So I came into it with all the confirmation bias in the world. And I came away with the cynic in me being brought out. And all I could think of while reading this book was the counter-arguments for feel-good productivity, because he didn't feel like he addressed them well enough. Like I said earlier, this book felt like a glorified English high school essay or a Mr. Beast video expanded into a book form, where the author didn't trust me enough to keep on reading, to stay on one topic for long enough to actually convince me of something. And that's really sad, because I was so excited to read it. So I've read my fair share of self-help books. I fucking hate that name because it makes me sound like someone who is in need of help, whereas I'm just someone who wants to be a better human. But that aside, these are two of the best self-help books I've ever read. And the main thing they have in common is that they fundamentally shifted a principle within me and changed all the methods above it and the ways of doing things. So for every way of doing things, you've got the methods, which are the surface level things, and then you've got the principles which underlay them. And there are all sorts of different methods which can achieve the same result. But if you've got the right principles, you can invent the methods which will work for you. But if you've got the wrong principles, you can't do shit. You'll bumble around, you'll come up with all sorts of different ideas and ways of doing things, and you won't get anywhere. And that's why my favorite self-help books actually fundamentally change the way I think by changing the principles underneath the things that I do. So principles are instilled into us from very early on in our lives, from our birth, our upbringing, our childhood, our evidence. They're very deep-seated. So to change a principle, you need either a mountain of evidence against it, or you need a really, really well-constructed argument. And both of these books do that. They have the evidence and they bring it together in a really cohesive manner to change the way I operated about a couple ideas. The idea of discipline and the idea of motivation, these have been like instilled into us from really early on. So to shift that fundamentally takes a whole lot of evidence and a whole lot and a very cohesive argument. That's what this book needed to do. But it didn't do that, which leads me into like my biggest criticism of this. He uses so many different ideas over the idea of feel-good productivity and so many pieces of evidence within those ideas to support them that he doesn't actually give enough time to any of them and doesn't actually convince me of anything. For example, the idea of intrinsic motivation being more important than extrinsic motivation. So the idea of actually wanting to do something for its own sake versus being rewarded for doing that thing. That is an idea which took a long time to shift in me. And I studied psych, so I heard about some of the studies around that, and they really shifted the way I was thinking about things. In this book, Ali gives that whole idea a couple pages at most, when I feel like that's the fundamental thing which can convince you of this. He chucks in a couple studies which kind of support the idea and then glosses over it and then moves on so quickly. By contrast, deep work is split into two halves. The first half, literally the first fucking this much of the book, is spent telling me what deep work is and convincing me that it's important. That's it. That's all it does for the first half of the book. Everything is leading to that, everything's supporting that one argument. And then the second half is telling me how to implement it. The depth which you get from a book like that and the way Cal Newport's kind of gone about that is so utterly convincing and so able to shift those underlying principles that Ali didn't do any of that. And it didn't access those deep feelings, and it didn't intellectually and emotionally shift the way I think about productivity. My second main issue with this book is he actually addressed it in the Mark Manson podcast.
I do wonder though, this, like when I interview people on my pod, I always ask the question of like, once someone is post-success, they're always preaching work-life balance.
Yeah.
But I always wonder, like, could they have achieved that level of success while also having work-life balance? Or is it a phase that everyone has to go through where there is always a phase of grindiness or whatever, and then on the other end you start preaching work-life balance?
I don't think so. Rich people, they go through 10 years of grind, failure, suffering, struggle, come out the other end, balance their lives, become very healthy and happy, and then turn around and tell everybody else that they should be balanced, healthy, and happy.
Apart from the beginning vignette where he talks about his life and how he got to this idea of feel-good productivity, he doesn't actually address how pivotal and how important the ideas of discipline and doing things that you don't want to do have been in his life. And I feel like this is a very common theme across self-help. There are people who get rich and famous and who get huge amounts of success from being unbalanced, like Mark Manson said in that clip, and then they go about preaching work-life balance and preaching how to enjoy things more. I absolutely disagree with that as an idea now. Like, I believe in feel-good productivity. I believe in loving what you're doing. But Ali just doesn't address the single biggest counter-argument to his book, like, in any real substantial detail. And he doesn't address how he's benefited and how far he's gotten from methods which don't involve feel-good productivity. The guy became a doctor and got through med school without using this and seemed to do just fine until he burnt out, which was unfortunate, and he addresses that there. But yeah, it's a bit frustrating as a reader and someone who hasn't achieved the levels of success that he has to hear someone preaching about these things when they've clearly already reaped the benefits of the counter argument. So obviously it's not all bad, and there are some really cool redeeming qualities which I like about it. So I really like his experiment framework. So he talks about the ideas in the book as things which the readers can try out for themselves and see if they fit, see if they help them in their lives, and experiment with the ideas rather than presenting them as some whole truth, which a lot of other gurus try to do. So I liked when he did that. And there's a few, I think this book could also be really useful not to shift the fundamental principles of people's thinking, but more as a reference manual for people who can go back and find different ideas and pick them out and use what's helpful for them at the moment. Kind of like how someone would a YouTube video. But that is kind of how it felt. It felt like Ali's background in YouTube had led him to create a glorified YouTube video where it's just 10 tips for feel-good productivity rather than a cohesive book which you can hold and you can think about and which can impact your life in a huge way. Yeah. I also think some of the way he glosses over evidence and chucks and has a shotgun approach to giving you all the evidence he can think of for each different point he makes is kind of like, feels like a literature review in science. I know Ali published a couple medical journal articles, so I feel like his background has contributed to the way this is written as well. It's also his first book, so I can understand how we've gotten to this place, but I'm just really disappointed. I thought it could be amazing, and I really think he has potential to write incredible things in future. But I really think he just needs to lean further into the medium and start to understand the things that readers want out of books versus out of YouTube videos versus out of different media. So yeah, this may come across as a bit of a rant, and I understand it's his first book, but I mean, like, this guy's first book was an absolute banger. I was just a little bit disappointed because I believe in this idea so much, and it's possibly my absolute North Star at the moment, feel good productivity or loving what you're doing. But yeah, disappointed me a little bit, Ali. Hopefully the next one's a little bit better.